Today we're going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to tell you the story of how I started a media network, ruined my life, and eventually became a published author. Ben, you're actually in some of this, but it's all fresh.
I'm there from like day 2.
From day 2. I think you're literally there on day 1. But Danielle, this is all going to be fresh for you, hopefully. So I've got an expert and then someone with fresh eyes. So hopefully you can both like judge me from different angles. Do you know what I mean? Shame me from different directions. A few notes before we get started. I have changed a few names for privacy reasons for anyone who isn't a public figure. What I might do then for your reference is I'll just do a quick snip of this.
Give me the name reference.
Yeah, just so that you know who the fuck I'm talking about.
And I can use the names as well, yeah.
Yeah. Did that one come through okay, Ben?
I do like these names, yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Carl.
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 Carl. Carl. Carl. Carl. Carl.
All right, so before we get into much of this, a bit of a preface. So I'm the author of Maynard Trigg and the previous creative director of digital and creative media works. I've had a complicated, busy career in a very short amount of time. I'm now the chief editor of ZeroIndent. I've worked in software, HR, communications, media criticism, and journalism. If you don't know who I am, then hopefully this will be an interesting deep dive into the person I used to be. And if you do know who I am, maybe this will inform a bit about how we got here. Now, the foundation of my creative career currently is founded on what I like to think of as a single premise, which is that I know very, very little of anything, and my goal is always to learn from people who are better. When I first started, this wasn't really the case. So this will be the first part of a 3-part series. The next 2 parts will delve into the first 2 Maynard Trigg books. So the first one will be an exploration of book 1, and we'll do sort of like a behind-the-scenes director's commentary, and we'll break down the story like chunk by chunk. And then part 2 will be a spoiler cast for book 2, where we'll do the same thing but for the second book. Which means, yes, Ben, I will be sending you a copy.
Yes, finally.
He hasn't read it
yet.
yet, so
so
he's
long.
Dead keen. So this episode is part 1, incredibly loud and extremely awful.
You know, I often ask myself such questions at times like these. I may be an overpaid producer, but I hope you will take my meaning with you. Do you understand this, Frank? Do you?
In 2013, I was 18 years old. Around December, me and my friends rented a holiday house by the beach in Caloundra. We did this because the previous year we'd done something similar for schoolies, Australia's equivalent of spring break at the end of high school. We had a relaxing time and so thought it was wise to repeat it. Ben already knows where this is going. I stayed on the top floor of the building with my girlfriend at the time, while the rest of my friends stayed in various rooms throughout the massive house. One of our friends, Mel, had planned to attend the holiday with her partner at the time, but they were going through a rocky period, so she ended up coming alone. As a result, Mel and I bonded because we'd been friends for a very, very long time, weirdly longer than Ben, who's the person I've known the longest, so it's weird to think about. I'd comfortably call her my oldest friend, but as things happen, we've drifted apart in the years since. Anyway, Mel and I attended the same primary school. My mother was a single parent for that period of my life and a full-time teacher, so my brother and I spent an awful lot of time at before and after school care. Is that like a concept you have in America, Danielle? Like the...
Yeah, we have it. It depends on where you are, what they call it. Where I grew up, they called it base.
Base.
I don't actually know why.
Before,
I've never...
after school...
Yeah.
Education?
Education?
Yeah.
Education?
Yeah.
That's weird.
That sounds right.
Here
But
it was
we have it.
Here it was the equivalent of like they would just pay a bunch of uni students minimum wage to keep your kids alive for the hours before and after school. It was more or less.
Yeah,
what
and even
was.
then it was a bit hit and miss.
Yeah, it really was.
Oh my god.
We were allowed to watch morning cartoons on the TV most mornings for exactly 35 minutes until it was time for outdoor activities. But it was really fucked because the exact window of time when the TV was on meant we always saw like the last 15 minutes of something and then the first 20 minutes of Pokemon. Like we never saw a full show for that whole like 4 years when I was at that school. And
so you only got 2 out of the 3 who's that Pokemon.
Yeah, it was very frustrating.
You didn't get all of them. Yeah.
No. It also meant that I had a really skewed perception of what like Saturday morning TV was, because I just assumed it was that period of time when they show cartoons. I didn't realize there was like an hour block before and an hour block after of other cartoons. Now, Mel and I attended the same school, and though she didn't attend the daycare, she watched the same cartoons in the morning at home. And on this holiday, those many years later, we were reminiscing about this stuff. It's kind of what you do because you have nothing else to talk about when you're that age because you have no real interests yet. In part because we were talking about it because it felt like we were moving into adulthood, leaving that kind of innocence behind, I suppose. And in part because Mel was struggling with her relationship, and reflecting on the past is a helpful way to understand where you're going. But mostly we were talking about it because we realized how much of the shows we had both retained, just how many of the details. We both had this innate, intricate recollection of Pokemon and the stories, the world, and the ideas contained within, to the point where it was kind of not really funny. Like, it was quite weird how much we remembered. So one afternoon on the holiday, we were sitting on the couch, drinks in hand, and watching old Pokemon episodes on the TV. We were joking and speculating. Eventually, Mel uttered a phrase that would change my life forever. What if Pokemon were real, though? How would that work? Oh, God. Oh, fuck. Do you remember that afternoon, Ben? I think you guys were out doing something.
Yeah, I think we were out. Yeah, maybe
Y'all
doing
went-
other things, but
Y'all went play golf or something like that? You did some activity
Well,
or something.
I don't know if we didn't. It wasn't golf. It was, if anything, mini golf.
Right.
But I don't know if we ended up actually going to mini golf. I think we just kind of fucked around
Okay.
in like some shopping center or something.
Right. The thrills of being a young person.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, this thought spiraled across the afternoon, and as we got progressively more drunk, we progressively spitballed more ideas. How would the education system have been shaped? How would everyday life be altered? What about the justice system? How would that look? I very drunkenly wrote a note in my phone about the idea we landed on. I'm going to read you an excerpt of that note now. This was really fucking hard to... I had to go and get my old iPhone 4.
Good lord.
Find a cable that plugged into it. Find a computer that it would actually like register with to get this shit off there. So this was like quite a journey. So stop me if any of these sound like complete nonsense because yeah, it's pretty much where I was at. So this is all, take this all in quotes until I get to the next section. I'm just going to read you out a few of the dot points, a few of the choice elements I was able to recover from that note in my phone. The first note is Bureau of Investigators who specialize in Pokemon-related crime, which, yeah, good solid start.
Yeah, wonder where that went.
Yeah, I wonder where that
I've heard
went.
of that before.
Then the follow-up thought to that, which is great, is perhaps it's under wraps, a secret component of the Pokemon League. And then in brackets, which, because like as a thought, like, okay, there's like some kind of a secret, like a crime investigative wing that obviously would need to be legislated. So how the fuck would it be secret? But then I'm thinking I'm so clever. I put in brackets after that, who is owned by someone? Question mark. Like I'm already like, ooh, conspiracy. Like it's, and then it just gets weirder. So Pokemon have to be registered through the Subwave Pokédex net, and there are certain Pokemon that are illegal. So things that specialize in hypnosis, arson, flooding, psychic manipulation, or destructive weather. So again, not unreasonable ideas, but already you can see where this is going.
You're really just like digging deep just chuck as much intrigue as possible into this.
Well, like force intrigue into it, yeah.
Yeah.
So story focuses on Hendrix, a private investigator contracted by the Bureau. Need a, quote, in brackets, need a name for it. So I still don't know what I'm going to call this, like, Bureau. To assist in more serious matters. Jesus. Should resemble the meta of a few cities in Johto to decide on which he lives and if any resemble Brisbane or Chicago. Why are those the two options?
You're like Brisbane.
Brisbane, where I live, and
Or
Chicago.
Chicago.
You know how
Chicago.
similar they are?
That's such a weird choice as well.
Oh, it's bizarre. Yeah. And then it goes on to, I mean, the real pitch here is Hendrix is one of the only Pokemon private investigators, as Pokemon have are almost widely a government asset. So they're not a myth per se, but they're not exactly mainstream. So being a Pokemon PI is super niche and doesn't really earn him much money. So the idea that like this would eventually become like a centralized, publicly owned, like asset, I guess, which is the exact opposite way the world has gone, because I didn't realize that like fascism was still a thing. But as a concept, it's not bad. The idea that like the government would try and legislate how Pokemon can be owned and used and stuff like that. But again, who was asking for this shit? Okay. Now, I don't have to tell you this train of thought did not end well for me. I went away from that holiday, and rather than let this die on the couch, I wrote a full-length Pokemon fanfiction novel centered on a noir detective. I've spoken about this a little before, and if you're really interested, you should check out our other podcast, That Time I Wrote a Fanfiction, on the network, where me and Aaron read through every chapter of the book with special guests and make fun of it. So if you want to find out, it's out there. It should be released by the time this goes up.
It is atrocious.
It's really rough.
It is
I am
not
so
great.
excited.
Yeah. It's going to be rough. Ben's been on an episode. I'm sure I'll get Danielle on at some point. The series is just me bringing on very talented people to make fun of me. It's great. Now, what followed this was a series of very odd decisions. At the time, I decided I wanted to publish this novel. I had the idea in my head that the concept was like genuinely revolutionary, that this project would change the way people thought about fan fiction. To the point where I guess the lie that I had told myself is that I wasn't writing fan fiction. I was like reshaping the way that we understood literature. Which
How old? You were what? 19 at this point?
Yeah.
Oh, just massive hubris.
Oh, we're going to get to that. Don't worry about that. We're going to talk a little bit about the kind of young person I was. But just as by way of a spoiler, I didn't change the face of literature. Just flagging that for you guys right out the gate. This doesn't end with me becoming like a Stephen King or something. Now, at this time, I realized that the book getting published itself was pretty unlikely. Pokemon is obviously copyrighted. So even though it was satirical, it would have been an enormous legal risk to publish this in general. And the chances of me having like the resources to defend such a claim were pretty low. Like I didn't have any money. But looking back on it, I'm like, it does fall into fair use. It just doesn't necessarily mean that they wouldn't have pursued it because they're quite a litigious company. I mean, Ben, you can probably speak to like the amount of shit they pull online where they DMCA take down all just anything.
There's no chance it would have been published like remotely.
Yeah. And so rather than internalize this very valuable lesson for a young person, I doubled down. I had assembled a team of very smart and very creative people to turn this very bad novel into a multimedia podcast production. I solicited local talented artist Carl to draw amazing images of key scenes. I enlisted Ben to narrate the audiobook. I recruited my girlfriend at the time to write expanded universe content.
I was the worst choice.
Least reliable operator too.
Dude, that
also,
was just you.
For a noir story, what was I thinking?
I mean, it was just bad. Like I remember doing recording the lines for it, and it was just so painful.
Yeah.
Does this still exist?
We'll get to that. Yeah.
The audio?
Yeah.
Somewhere probably.
It's definitely somewhere. I think I've dug around to try to find it.
It must be on a Dropbox of mine somewhere.
It's definitely on a Dropbox somewhere.
Yeah.
I don't think I have the raw files.
I'm not sure. It would be on my old MacBook probably. Actually, I mean, so the original idea had a lot of issues with it. Just to list a few. Stories have to necessitate their own existence. They have to feel like in their own space. They have to feel needed in some way. Like they have to feel like a story that needs to be told. And that, just as a concept, like it didn't have that quality. Alongside some oddly sexist stuff, questionable structure, and just a general lack of control. I wasn't really well trained at that point. But I pulled ahead regardless. Through many sluggish stops and starts, we failed to ever really get the project past about Chapter 5 in whatever format we were trying to create it in, whether that was publishing it as a podcast or trying to put it out as like a web series, whatever. Instead, I started a podcast alongside, hoping to gain enough traction to garner interest in the project and then eventually launch it. This podcast became Art for Artists over a long period of time, a valuable piece of art in its own right. However, at the time, the fan fiction continued to just be a very bad idea. Now, around this period in my life, I was eager to write something original on the side. This is something I haven't really talked about publicly before, so I'm going to try and work through it. When I was approaching this script, it wasn't like the Druckmann one where I was able to be like, okay, this is hard to verify. I'm just going to put the caveat that like, this is an unverified fact. It doesn't come from 2 independent sources, or the source that it does come from I don't necessarily trust. This is difficult because it's anecdotes about my life that I have some evidence for, where I can go through Dropbox files and be like, okay, this did happen at that time. But other stuff is a combination of like me trying to remember stuff when I was like going through a period in my life where I was just drinking all the fucking time. So I don't remember much of it very well. Plus I was really young and I was like remembering it through this biased lens at the time. And then have like going back to it, have realized that at the time I was mythologizing that period of my life as well. So a lot of this, like to what extent I can claim that it's true, it's the stuff I could remember or find. So Ben, if something doesn't line up, jump in and let me know and we can try and puzzle through it. That's my disclaimer. So while running the kitchen at Sizzler, I started working on a piece between shifts. I wrote on my MacBook Air in a booth in section 1. The story started from a very, very simple idea. The simple idea was about this old kind of pirate character going to a junkyard full of like derelict skyships and finding one, this remnant of a skyship from like legend that no one believed existed. Now, before we get into some of this stuff, I wanted to detail a bit about who I was at the time. Not to be self-flagellating, but I think it's of note to be reflexive given how often on this show I have and will continue to call out people for being shitty. So I'm always conscious. It's why I drop in anecdotes about dumb stuff I've done. It's why whenever I talk about someone who like has like maybe sexist views or whatever, I'll refer to a point in time when I had sexist views. I like to be reflexive in that way, but this isn't going to paint a pretty picture. So still like me afterwards, guys. This was around 2014 or so, the height of a time when I was struggling with a lot of issues around my identity. I had a really strange childhood that matriculated into an even weirder adolescence. I was deeply fundamentally insecure, but outwardly incredibly confident. I was already struggling with substance abuse at 18 and trying to square away the trauma of my parents' divorce with the continual sensation that I was never enough in comparison to my brothers. I had this anger, this deep, impotent rage in my bones that made me into this judgmental, sanctimonious asshole whenever I was pricked. Here's a Tumblr post from 2011 that I think illustrates this point quite well.
Good lord.
Yeah, I had to do a lot of navel gazing for this one. I didn't like what was in the mirror. So yeah, Danielle, for your reference, and I suppose for listeners who haven't seen the video that I made on the Pokemon fanfiction, I used to run this really toxic Tumblr blog. And I mentioned this in our Druckmann episode, but I did some really offensive shit, like ranked the hottest girls at school. Like it was just really bad. Very sexist and shitty. So here's a post from that blog in 2011. Quote, and again, I can't do the tone of voice anymore because I'm not that person, but read this with a level of like, I'm pretty sure I'm better than everyone. That's how this comes across, or how it should be received. Quote, we are utterly ridiculous. It really bugs me as a whole that we're a bunch of hypocritical shitheads. The majority... Fucking hell. Oh, fuck. The majority of...
author,
it's
McNeill.
It's rough, eh? It's like... okay. The majority of teenagers these days feel the need to share their every thought on Facebook, document everything in public view, and decide that those who lead private lives are uncool. Now, I have no problem being... I have no problem being called uncool because I play video games, love Batman and Doctor Who. I have no problem with that. Fuck me. What I don't tolerate is when other people... What I don't tolerate is when other people are put down because they lead private lives which they don't document on Twitter or Facebook. It's pretty fucked up that people think it's appropriate to insult, bully, or harass each other online, that's in caps, online, because of something someone else said online. That's just fucked. They complain about people not posting their feelings and every single freaking thought, and then complain when someone says something they disagree with. I think our generation has forgotten that the internet isn't written in pencil, it's written in ink. Once you posted something on Facebook or Twitter or Tumblr, it's there forever, and I just think people forget that sometimes. I know I do. Yeah, we fucking know that. This thing's still out there. Hang on. Anyway, I haven't read. It's just I was like, wow, that's way too sexist. And just like offensive. Anyway, it's about at the time, which why am I talking about this? At the time, I was really defensive of the fact that I had a girlfriend. And one of the things that I would do is, like, regardless of the argument, try and use it as a way to bring up the fact that I had a girlfriend.
Oh, dude.
Yeah.
Oh man.
It was rough.
What a classic gamer boy move.
It was a real neckbeard move. This post ends with, anyway, I haven't ranted in a while because my life has been great, so have fun Eastering or holidaying whilst eating chocolate if you're not into the Jesus thing. End quote. Yeah. It was bad out there, guys. It was bad out there for me, okay? I just had awful opinions about the world and women. It was not good. Now, this weird thing happened around this time for the next 3 years where a lot of people from my school and social life followed my blog. I can only attribute this to my awful takes, but also my articulation. Even in that post, you get the sense that I was writing with an eloquence that wasn't necessarily approachable for most people that age. I had the ability to speak my mind clearly and vividly, when most people were struggling to maintain the same identity in consecutive fortnights. I had also acquired a few quasi-stalkers in my anonymous messages. This was my first real taste of fame, I guess. Or at least attention that was because of the things I was saying, regardless of the quality of what I was saying. Now, back to the idea I had for that other story. Sometime in 2013, we'd planned to play a game of Dungeons & Dragons homebrew where we served aboard a sky pirate ship. We went on many adventures in a strange steampunk D&D world. Its similarities to my story now are fleeting, but at the time it had some of the basic concepts I would eventually explore. Sky pirates, some form of eldritch pursuit, and that was kind of it. Do you remember that game, Ben?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think it actually, it kind of started as like high fantasy, but just like there are sky ships.
Mm-hmm.
But I think my character died and you were like, oh, okay, we'll reintroduce you at some point. And I got reintroduced as like a captain of this really shitty sky ship.
That's right.
That would fly purely based on like will alone. Like it was one of those things where it's like this plane shouldn't fly.
Yeah.
But just because the captain thinks it should fly, it flies.
It was basically Firefly.
Oh yeah, and it just completely jumped the shark after that and just became Firefly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and from that point it was just like it started off just like, oh, we're playing D&D, and then we'd just refer to it as, oh, we're playing Sky Pirates.
Yeah, that's right.
It's completely just like flipped the needle. It's just like, yeah, it's just Sky Pirates.
It's just Sky. Yeah, if we just own it, that's fine. I always wonder like how many fucking fantasy novels started as D&D games. It's got to be a lot.
Oh, I imagine like a lot. Yeah.
Now, regardless of how directly literal those ideas were to what I ended up writing, the germs were there for the concepts, like the idea of skyships, the idea of scarcity, the theme of like unending pursuit. I had many discussions with a friend in French class. I was a very poor French student. These weren't conversations in French, by the way. About the mechanics of the world, about where the water might come from on these great sky ships, in these sky cities where these people lived, like how the world shaped itself, what happened in the history. And it was one of those things where I just kept taking notes, and over time, like I kept writing ideas. I wouldn't say I was writing a story. I was just like writing snippets of prose. The result was, over the next 2 years, I had a 2 million word manuscript. I wouldn't necessarily call it a story so much as just a lot of words. Like there wasn't necessarily a through line. Yeah, it was a weird beast. Here's a quick snippet by way of a tone setter, just to give you an idea of what this looked like. And Danielle, maybe mentally you can compare this to how Maynard Trigg is now, because it was a very different, like, it's just really fundamentally different. Also, I was a much shittier writer, so there's also that. Quote, Maynard was determined to stay awake, but as soon as he put his head on the pillow, he was fast asleep. He dreamed violently. He started walking through an empty field. Nothing in sight but waving hillocks of dust and rusted memories. A gust carried the grit across his vision. It was in his eyes, it cut against his skin and filled his pores. He hated sand.
No!
Did you actually unironically write that? Did you seriously? Was this before like the prequel memes kind of resurgence?
Yeah, it was.
Wow, you predated I hate sand jokes.
I didn't read this full extract before I grabbed it from the document for this script. I just picked like a random section.
You just
wow. Boy, okay.
Good lord.
Good grief, yeah. His footsteps were blown away even as his boot heels lifted off the ground. When he blinked, he found he was standing on a ship. The wind tossed his hair about his brow, flooded his coat, and made him feel alive. He snapped awake, sitting up in bed. End quote. So it's not objectively awful, but it's doing something that I hate doing in my storytelling now, where it's sort of, it's like, it's all provocating, where it's telling you how he's thinking and what he's feeling and how things are affecting, instead of showing and letting that stuff be subtext. It's just like a very different type of storytelling than the stuff I'm interested in.
It's like dream sequences in like DC movies.
Yeah,
just like,
it has that,
where the subtlety just like smacks you across the face, and you're like, oh, good God.
But
yeah, like,
but it's
like metaphor whiplash.
But it thinks it's being subtle.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's literally hashtag deep. Like that's how
it's like.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh, you can't picture this in your head because it's just so subversive.
Because it's just
so
like,
intricate.
because it's just like, it's so intricate, bro.
Yeah.
No, let me picture this. It's like an apocalypse, right? But Batman's in a trench coat. Now, let me stop you. It's gonna look fucking sick. First of all, it's gonna be your favorite part of the movie, and you're never gonna fully understand why. Sorry, that was a bit of a drive-by for Zack Snyder. If you're listening to this, Zack, I'm sorry. I don't think you should be gainfully employed to make films. That's all. Now, the story was far more confused tonally, and was attempting to be mature without really understanding what that meant. So exactly what Ben said. While I was writing this, I was also writing a very weird sequel. So this is where I'm just taking a brief aside to take us a little bit down the origins of Maynard before we get back to the fan fiction. I promise they're looping back together. So while I was writing this 2 million word piece, I was also writing a very bizarre sequel. The sequel was set 20 years later than the original story on a far-out skyport, focusing on the protagonist Martha and a retired Maynard. In my head, I was attempting to recreate Patrick Rothfuss's Kingkiller Chronicles, but in practice, I just forged an odd Sky Pirate meets Zombies action story that had a lot of tonal dissonance. Now, fast forwarding a little bit, in 2015, I made contact with an agent. I won't say who now, but they read the sequel and they were kind of interested. What followed was a very strange experience where they shopped the manuscript around and promised me they could secure some offers. They had very little interest in the work itself. This sequel was vastly different to Maynard Trigg as it is today. The manuscript was called The Constable. It clocked in at around 35,000 words, a respectable novella/novel. Tonally, the piece resembled something akin to a Stephen King fantasy story, I suppose. Do you remember this at all, Ben? I don't know if I even would have told you about it.
No, I'm trying to like, is this? Yeah, no.
It was like a hard-boiled cop
2015.
drama.
I think 2015. I was like, I like jumped off the shark as well.
Yeah.
I was like off doing my own things.
That sounds about right. So that checks out. So Danielle, like, how worried are you about my sanity at this point?
I mean, just a little.
Just a little. That's good. That's good. Passingly. Have not talked about a lot of this before, so it's really interesting to go back to. All right, I'm just going to read you a snippet from that book, because again, I think it's worthy doting on briefly how the tone has evolved over time, because there'll be something we'll talk a bit about in part 2, but this stuff is just like so weird to read because it doesn't read like it's me. Like, I have such a strong voice and style now, but this stuff just, it honestly feels like reading someone else. It's so bizarre. Quote, Martha ducked and scooted with her back to the wall. He whirled and tried again. She kept moving along the stone, getting closer to the lamp that hung above the door the boy and the man had emerged from. It's a comma missing. Martha's hip finally hit the doorframe and she spun, reaching up to unhook the lamp. It was made of a heavy steel and still hissed with flame, the man wincing against the light as she swung it from its hook. Before she could turn, her jacket went tight over her shoulders and she was wrenched off her feet. He flung her against the door and knocked it from its hinges. Martha struck the wood, splinters slicing through her exposed stomach and chest. She hit the ground on her back and gasped for air. Her chest wouldn't move, her eyes were wide, and then her lungs filled in a gasp. As awareness washed in, she realized how much of a colossal fuck-up she'd made. She would have taken him down sober without much trouble, but her head was hazy, and she was far too slow. End quote. That is like... what the fuck was even happening in that? Like, the attribution errors, like, the blocking's really weird. Yeah, it's not illegible, but it's not good, right? It's not the kind of thing that an agent would read and be like, yeah, let's publish that. I would hope.
It was the kind of same like on the blocking. The original Pokemon had like the same issues where like the action scenes were mostly incomprehensible.
Yeah.
This is better because you're doing less wild movements of the body. The
Yeah.
Pokemon one, you're reading it and you're like, wait, what is he doing? It's like how like that. You know, he's like pivoting like 3 different joints in his body.
It's like
to like throw someone across the room. It's like,
Just say he pushed him. Yeah.
And at least this is better, where it's just like, you still use the word hip. That word triggers me like to no end, because you used it so many times in the bloody Hendrix story.
What was the expression? He flipped them on his hip or something. Like there was a turn of phrase.
There was some weird shit. Yeah, and you're like, what does that even mean?
I don't fucking know, man. Yeah, I don't fucking know.
And it's better in this one because you're at least using space.
You can see it evolving. There's like it's the funny thing, man. It's like, and we're gonna
it's
go
not
back.
just the 2 characters get teleported to like a Street Fighter,
to like a blank arena.
flat arena,
Yeah.
and they just kind of duke it out, and then they go back to the real world. It's like a Pokemon match. Oh, it's like a Pokemon match. We get teleported
Oh my
to the
God,
battle.
that's literally
we get
what I was-
teleported
yeah.
back. Maybe it's just a really good metaphor,
Oh, no.
and it only took about 10 years to figure out.
Damn. Maybe I was on some shit. Should we go back and watch
No, keep going. Just keep going. Don't look back. Gaze into the abyss, and the abyss gazes back.
And it told you that metaphor was solid. Why'd you abandon it?
Yeah. It's like, hey, this was actually pretty good. Like, shut up!
What a horrific thought. Yeah, no, you're not wrong. I mean, this piece was pitched at a far more mature audience, and it was trying to be gritty and approachable, 2 things that don't necessarily go hand in hand. One of the most curious artifacts of that process is that a lot of the ideas ended up in the Maynard Trigg stories today. It was the first of my stories to feature Parker, who becomes more central as the stories go on. And it was the first one to centralize this idea of endless pursuit as an allegory for someone's past, which is something that is like, those 4 books are intrinsically about that. It's not particularly good. The Constable isn't particularly good, but it was far closer to the quality that I would want to be approaching than the fan fiction. Which, speaking of, let's return to a little bit before. So about a year before the Constable, the fanfiction project started to fall apart. We couldn't make any money for pretty obvious reasons, so I couldn't really afford to pay people. Deadlines weren't really met, artists found other paying work to do, and my will alone wasn't enough to get it across the line. There was a handful of people who were very frustrated with me, in one part because I'd wasted their time to an extent, but I think more importantly because they believed in what I was trying to do and I'd let them down. My confidence didn't bear the fruits they expected, nor the ones that I kind of was hoping. Despite all of my creative bravado, I failed to execute. And when we failed fucking hard. And we failed fast. There was a period of time where we took a break from making content altogether. And I kind of did what I was hoping was some soul searching at the time, trying to decide what to do with my career. But the result was like a lot of the people that worked on those original projects, like those friendships and creative partnerships just like ended for the most part. But I wouldn't let it die. In true David fashion, I decided that I knew better than the universe. I could correct this erroneous thing that had occurred. And so I fought against it really hard. Instead of letting it die on the operating room, I called in a favor from a friend in the publishing industry. And we had 200 books made. And we sold all 200. They are out there in the world somewhere. These books still exist. If you have
You were
one,
trying to claw them back.
please contact me. I need to know if someone owns one of these.
Wait, what is the book called?
The Necessity of
forget.
Hendrix.
Okay.
The Necessity of Hendrix. Yeah, they're out there somewhere, people. I don't have a copy anymore. We're trying to get some reprints made. It's just been on the back burner because of book 2 coming out. But when the podcast season finale comes out, we're going to be releasing copies of the book, so you can buy it if you want. So if you want to find out more,
So you like in earnest released the book.
yeah,
And now,
Ironically.
in pure irony, you're
Yeah.
going to re-release the book
Correct.
completely unchanged. You're just like, at first it was like, this is amazing, and now it's just like, this is complete trash.
It's illegible, but it's fascinating garbage. Yeah. So if you want to find out
You
more
need
about...
to just put a massive preface on it. It's just like, this book ain't great.
Oh, the foreword is like, this is fucked. Like it's quite explicit, and it's rough. But if you want to find out more about that, wherever you get your podcast, just search for That Time I Wrote a Fanfiction. But people who followed the podcast, the video essays, and like my voice and my creative output had bought these books that were ultimately a tribute to my own vanity. It was this like desperate final attempt to disagree with the outcomes of this process. I don't know how else to articulate it other than it. Arrogance is the wrong word, but it's a thing that is like, I think a lot of people struggle with, which is accepting that something is over can be really hard to do. And I refuse to let this thing go. Now, around that time, I was wrapping up my writing degree, and one morning I walked into a poetry tutorial. The cool kids of the writing class, and yes, there was a cool kids group, sat in one corner, and because I was running late, because I'd just come directly from my job, I ended up at their table because there was a free chair. One of the young people in that group was wearing a white t-shirt and a waistcoat, and they read out a poem to the class. I left that room without speaking to the young man, but I knew he had something I hadn't seen ever in my entire waking life. That poem communicated something to me I didn't think I'd ever see. He didn't just have raw talent, but he had a strong, defined, refined voice. This guy knew his shit and cared about it. In the weeks later, I got to know this young man, Aaron Orosfari. I pitched Aaron to write a show for the network, a sort of Night Vale-esque narrative set in a fantasy world. I won't talk about the concept because it's something we may eventually make, but it was essentially a story about, the concept was what if when you play like a Dungeons and Dragons game and you stop playing, what if the world continues to exist after you leave the table? And what would the people in that story have to say, and what would their lives look like? And it was a really interesting idea, and I think what we landed on was something that was uniquely me and Aaron, which we'll get to when we talk about Maynard Trigg, because it was interesting and started somewhere accessible and then progressively got more and more weird and interesting. And I think that's probably like a hallmark of everything we've done together. We worked on a few concepts and even had a script for a first episode. During this work, Aaron learned that I had a novel of my own, and he was eager to read it. He did so, and one evening, he and another of my colleagues from the class, they basically sat me down for an intervention. You've got to remember at this time, this agent is shopping around a Constable, right? So they've read both, and they're like, listen, you cannot let this get published as it is, they told me. It's just that bad, they explained. And for the first time in my young adult life, I actually listened to someone else. I listened to what these two people had to say about my work because I realized that one of the things that I'd been fucking up was not listening to other people. At the same time as this, I was in the process of breaking up with my girlfriend. It was a really complicated, messy breakup. We both worked at the same restaurant, and I was interested in another girl who worked there. I'm not overly proud of anything I did at that time, except for the fact that I was never cruel. I was cowardly, maybe, but I was never cruel or deliberately hurtful. But the upshot of this happening around the same time is that my attention was drawn in many, many directions. This will be a theme of my life moving forward. I wasn't sleeping a lot. I'd started a new job at a software company and slowly transitioned out of Sizzler. I started drinking most, if not every night. Not on purpose, but there was no time to actually relax, so I drank and edited videos. I drank and edited podcasts. I drank and wrote novels. I drank and wrote assignments. There wasn't much I didn't do while I wasn't drinking. I was doing 4 days a week at this new job, and it was really dull data entry. This was good because it freed me to come home and be creative and productive, but it had this weird result of I was holding my breath while I was at work and then breathing out when I got home, and that just meant that I wanted to relax even more. I wrote 1,000 words a day for a while, if not more, trying to craft something good off the back of this kind of, I guess, intervention discussion. Eventually, Aaron sat me down. He told me in no uncertain terms that while the 2 million word manuscript had good elements, I'd kind of missed the point of the story I was trying to tell. The story had to be about Maynard, about his journey from Carthage. So we'll take a quick break and then talk a bit about how like the actual story came to be. But this point in my life is pretty fucking dark, and we'll get to some nice stuff in a minute. But this is sort of the night as dark as before the dawn type moment for me, I think. Things were not good, and we'll talk about that in a second. But we'll take a quick ad break, and when we come back, onto the good stuff.
Not gonna lie, your Tumblr post that you were talking about, that totally sounds like something I probably would have posted too, like something similar. Like, I was the most arrogant person in college in 2011.
Yep.
I just thought, but for different reasons though. Like, I just thought I was like this righteous Christian.
Oh no. Okay.
Yeah. So.
Wow.
Yeah. That totally sounds like something I would write.
Yeah. I was weirdly.
So I probably would have read it.
I was so sanctimonious.
Now what we do here is not backbreaking, nor is it putting our minds to the hard employments of solving the world's problems. So, we come, as we must, to discuss these advertisements with you in order to put food on our plate and pay the talented people who make this program possible.
Editing David here. This episode is brought to you by my novel that we're talking about, Maynard Trigg and the Creature Beneath the Veil, as well as the sequel that should be out by the time you're listening to this, Maynard Trigg and the City of Whispers. What you're about to hear is an excerpt of the fantastic Wayne June reading a snippet from the book. If you like what you hear and want to learn more and join the adventure, head to maynardtrigg.com. That's maynardtrigg.com.
The walls and floor and window frames shuddered as a metal boot crossed the threshold and a figure stepped into the house. Beneath its heavy hood, 2 red discs glowed where eyes should have been. The creature stopped moving. Its head snapped to face them, eyes radiating through the window.
"The boy will run,"
Mooney cried. Mooney pulled Maynard forward. They sprinted down the porch as the front door was thrown from its hinges. Maynard looked back and saw the creature standing in the doorway. The red discs flickered and went black, and the seeker was enveloped in the darkness beyond the door. Invisible. Join the adventure at MaynardTrigg.com and use code TRAILER10 at checkout for 10% off your first paperback order.
Welcome back. So at this time, Aaron basically sat me down and he was like, look, you keep writing this manuscript and you just keep like telling more story, but you haven't found the story you're trying to tell yet. And he explained to me that he reckoned the story should be about Maynard specifically and about his journey from Carthage. And so it was that one summer I took a single sentence from the 2 million word manuscript and in 90 days wrote the entirety of Maynard Trigg and the Creature Beneath the Veil. I finished the book and sent it to Aaron. That same weekend, I hopped on a plane to Melbourne. I met with Sanspants Radio, one of Australia's fastest growing podcast networks, and sought some wisdom from their CEO, Joel Zammit. I also attended Gabriel Bergmose's book launch, drank many pints with very talented people, but most importantly, spent a whole day with Zammit. We workshopped a new podcast format for Art for Artists, which would eventually become the show in the future and lead it to its success. I'm trying to think, Ben, do you remember when I got back and had the new idea for the show?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember what it was before that? Yeah, do you want to explain what it was before that? Good idea?
Well, before it was like just an hour-long ramble that had no plan and would have like 2 to 3 to 5 different topics, seemingly randomly. It was, I think we only did like 10 episodes like that, and they were all hot garbage.
We did about 40. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Everything's just,
Yeah.
everything's a lot bigger than I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then after it was just like, we need to actually have topics and cut it down and not ramble for an hour.
Yeah. I mean,
that's probably the best thing we did.
Absolutely.
It was very much just becoming just like every other podcast out there where it's just, well, every other bad podcast where it's just 2 white dudes rambling for hours on end.
Yeah. It was a really, like, I will never be more grateful for any, like, any meeting I've ever had in my entire life where he goes, Sam was like, okay, like, what's the podcast? And I explained to him the stuff that we talked about. And he's like, no, but what's the podcast? And I was like, well, that was it. And he's like, well, what do you mean? Like, you're just talking about stuff. And it was such a moment for me where I was like, oh, fuck. Like, I've never thought about it before. And then we sat down and he was like, and then he came up with the idea of each like piece of media we covered, we could cover a specific aspect of it. So he was like, you could do like the world building of Lord of the Rings and then come back and do like the dialogue of Lord of the Rings. And then you could come back and do this about, and what it did is he was like, it means that you don't have to consume so much media every week. You can actually return to stuff in a meaningful way. And no one else is doing that kind of granularity of analysis. And you seem like you'd be really good at it. And so like when I talk about this stuff, I'm like, he gets all the credit for that idea because it was completely his idea. And it changed the podcast. I remember we came back and we shot the first 2 or 3, and it was so much better. It was so much better. Like it was like night and day. Yeah. Like honestly.
Yeah. You go like the episode like the week before, and then just the week after, and there was no kind of like preparation or no different preparation.
Mm-hmm.
It was still mostly off the cuff. I don't think we did real research until like later, but even just the different framing and like the time constraint just made it so much better.
Yeah, and it was a time constraint plus the subject constraint. Like when we talked about, okay, like the Daredevil's corridor fight scene. And it meant that we had this really specific thing that we had to extract something meaningful from, which it turned out something we're really fucking good at. And like our dynamic benefits that kind of thing because I bring to bear like too much analysis and then you go, well, that's dumb, but this makes sense. And what about this? And it, I don't know, created a really good rhythm. But it made me realize something. And this was for me like a pretty important trip in my life, I think. I realized that I may not have to like hope or create this like facade that I was successful. I realized that somewhere in a version of reality that could actually happen, I might actually be able to make good art and good shows. Only if I listened to people and only if I kind of extracted my own ego from the whole process. And that realization, I've never really had many epiphanies in my life, but that was definitely what I would count as one of them. It was enough to keep the fire lit when working on the novel, when I did eventually return to Brisbane. Now, a few things happened at this time as well that are worthy of note. First of which, a product manager at my job recognized something unique in me. I'm still exactly unclear what he saw, whether it was my drive or my tenacity or my articulation or my problem solving or some other bullshit value. I don't know. I'm not sure, but whatever it was, he wanted me to work on the product, no more data entry. So I taught myself HTML, CSS, JavaScript. I taught myself design philosophy. And before long, I was working on the UX for the software alongside Cameron, the senior product manager. At exactly the same time, my roommate and best friend left without a word. I went on a second trip to Melbourne, and when I got back, he was just gone with all of his belongings from the house we lived in. I haven't heard from him since.
We still have that PC.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah. So still haven't heard from him, but that's a story for another day. This was a weird period in my life because while this happened, I also moved in with my brother as a result of that. I was working a job that I had previously enjoyed, but like the step up to responsibility was cool, but also it increasingly made me miserable because my boss sucked a little bit. And my life became this game of like going through the motions, both in my professional and personal life. And when I say that, I don't know how else to explain this, and I'll give you a marker here, Ben, for the period when this was, to see if you have any insight. But this was around the time when we started recording a lot of Let's Plays and just getting absolutely like shit-faced.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't remember doing them, but I remember that.
Same.
Remember that they happened.
I just remember how miserable I was. Like I'm pretty fucking depressed and anxious at the moment, but it was a different kind of... I know that was a different kind of misery. Like it's so hard to explain.
That was definitely like the grind years where we just were doing so much.
Yeah, well, we were putting out 2 episodes of Let's Play a day, a podcast a week, and I was putting out a video essay a fortnight.
Yeah, like it was
which is just like a crazy high volume of content.
That was like when the afternoons that we would record every week, which was like one afternoon a week, and it would go from like 4 through to like 10.
Yeah.
So like almost like 5-6 hours of recording.
Yeah.
On those afternoons, which for me was like I wasn't really doing much else, so it was fine.
Yeah. It was also 5 or 6 hours of just drinking, basically.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, it was I just remember like how much work I was doing and how unhappy I was, I guess. And I don't remember the exact moment when I felt like I'd lost control, but there was a moment when I realized that I didn't have control. And I'll talk about that in a second, but is that ever something that I don't know if everyone goes through that stuff, Danielle, but like, did you ever have that moment where you were like in that period of your life where like the rest of your life hadn't really started yet and you were just in that pit of some description?
Yes. Yes, definitely.
Glad it's not just me.
Yeah. That was like around 2014 through 16 kind of for me.
Yeah. So probably the same time. Then.
Yeah, oh wow, same for me, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Just let's all bond over our collective misery.
Right.
I'm going to read you a quote from The Sad Horse Show, just to give you an idea of what this felt like. Quote, usually when people ask how I'm doing... The Sad Horse Show is BoJack, by the way.
Yeah, I picked up on
everyone,
I was gonna say.
Just for everyone else who doesn't know. Quote, usually when people ask how I'm doing, the real answer is I'm doing shitty. But I can't say I'm doing shitty because I don't even have a good reason to be doing shitty.
So if I say I'm doing shitty, then they say, why? What's wrong? And I have to be like, I don't know, all of it.
So instead, when people ask me how I'm doing, I usually say, I'm doing so great.
But when this girl at the Jack in the Box asked me if I was having an awesome day, I thought, well, today I'm actually allowed to feel shitty. Today I have a good reason. So I said to her, well,
my mom died.
And
she immediately burst into tears. Now I have to comfort her, which is annoying, and meanwhile there's a line of people forming behind me who are all giving me these real judgy looks because I made the Jack in the Box girl cry.
And she's bawling and she's saying, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, it's fine, it's fine. I mean, it's not fine, but you know, it's fine. And I would like to order a double Jack meal, and I've kind of got somewhere to be, so maybe less with the crying and more with the frying, huh?
And the girl apologizes again, and she offers me a free churro with my meal. And as I'm leaving, I think, I just got a free churro because my mom died. No one ever tells you when your mom dies, you get a free churro. I read that quote from the Sad Horse Show to illustrate a point, which is that it's really hard when you're in these moments to realize that other people are feeling things that also aren't great. It's a great example of like, it's hard to empathize when you feel like shit because you assume that your grief or your pain it must be so much more significant than everyone else's. And I think at that time, that was definitely where I was at. Yeah, that period of my life got pretty dark. I'd refined my workflow for scripts and videos to where I could pump out a video essay in about 3 or 4 days. It was just a really shit situation to be living in. My brother didn't have air conditioning, so most weeks I was going to work, coming home, drinking, editing, and passing out in like 35-degree heat. I was also when I was skateboarding again, so I'd just get shit-faced and skateboard and yeah.
Smashed up.
Smashed up and yeah, really, I got some scars from that I will always have. And things were bad for like quite a long time. I don't know. Yeah, work went from being great to shitty really quickly. My boss was a huge bully. I didn't really have a social life. I could barely take care of myself and had no interest in self-care or any realization that was something I should be paying attention to. It would take me many years later and lots of therapy to realize this, but at the time, it wasn't just that I was hugely depressed and anxious. It was also that I was realizing that was the thing that I would have to deal with for the rest of my life. So it was also the realization that I think I was trying to run away from feeling those things because if I acknowledged that I was feeling them, it meant that I'd have to recognize that's just a part of my brain and it's going to be there forever. And that's a scary thing to have to reconcile. So rather than confront this, I avoided feeling it at all. At some point, I don't remember when, I decided enough was enough. I started running like a lot. I started eating better again slowly. And I moved out of my brother's house. I got serious about podcasting and eventually one day picked up the Maynard Trigg manuscript again. And that was when the rest of my life started. I found not only that I enjoyed editing the book, but I was really good at it. And I say that in the sense that when I was sending it to Aaron, he was like, wow, you're making like changes that are actually impacting the script. And for the first time, the writing made sense, not just as a hobby, but it started to feel like it could be a career. What followed was, ironically, a period of prolonged excellence that often comes off the back of a period of prolonged misery. I was crushing it at work, then coming home and working on the novel. I got fit again. I even did fucking keto. Aaron and I continued working through the editorial process to get the story up to speed, and I was eventually able to show it to people. Now, this was around the time that the podcast got incredibly successful as well, and the book was starting to shape up nicely. So things did eventually turn around, even if at the time I didn't believe that would ever happen. I don't know if you remember this, Ben, but there was a point where I sent the book to you, and this was like back when you weren't really reading that much.
And I didn't read it.
And you didn't read it, and then I remember sending it to Laura, and Laura read it, and she was like, this is really fucking good. And I was like, oh, is it? Because no one had really, no one whose opinion I trusted to be like, this is shit, had been like, well, because everyone else is just being nice, you know? But she was like, no, it's good, and like was able to describe why, and I was like, oh, maybe I'm onto something here. I remember that very vividly. But it was funny. I never thought, I think at the time, like I was so wrapped up in my own like deep unhappiness that it just didn't occur to me that things would get better. I don't know, it's hard to see out of that stuff, I think, when you're in it, but the manuscript came to a relative polish, and we'll talk a lot about the process in the next part when we hit the recording for that, and we'll kind of break down the story and go through it. I'll try and get Aaron on board for that because I think he'll have some insight as well. But as the manuscript came to a polish, I had this weird dilemma. Obviously, the deal with the agent had fallen through because they couldn't get the Constable published anywhere, and I basically mothballed the whole thing. So that avenue of publication was basically dead to me for a while. So I had this problem of like what to do with the book. I submitted it to a few agents, reached out to some contacts in the publishing industry for advice, but no one really had any insight. I met with a few people, really, really talented people in the Australian publishing industry, and they just didn't really have any insight. They were like, look, it's a good book, but not really sure what you should do with it. And one morning at work, I explained to Cameron that I had written a novel. He went quiet in the way that only Cam can do and seemed deep in thought most of the day. That or he was ignoring me. It's hard to tell with Cam. That afternoon, he told me I should just sell it myself, and I looked at him like he was insane. Now, Cameron had a background in e-commerce, and he explained how relatively straightforward it would be to create a Shopify storefront and get the books made print to order. It turns out it really was quite straightforward. I did a few tests, a shitload of troubleshooting, and we had a viable process. We tried lots of different sizes and covers, and there are still like a few prototype prints out there somewhere of like different dimensions and like weird cover. There was a green cover for a while.
There's a few large books.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I don't know if I have. Let me see if I have any. Hang on. I should have grabbed them before the recording.
There's a few that have like horrendously bad print errors, where just like a page will just be like shifted down halfway, and you're like, that's not correct.
Oh my god. See, I always look for that stuff when I'm reading, actually, and 9 times out of 10, I wish I would have kept a diary, actually, of all the stuff I find in books, because
the weird print errors there.
Yeah, ever since I was like a teenager, I found it, and it's like, it's too late now.
If you want print errors, the book, I don't have it. Oh, I do have it with me. This is a tangent, but if you want a novel of print errors, I can highly recommend the book House of Leaves, which is just print errors.
Just print errors?
Intentional print errors.
Are you plugging someone else's? I still need to read. Are you plugging someone else's book on this show about my book?
I am, yeah.
I mean, House of Leaves is kind of one of those books that I feel like I should have read at this point, but I still haven't.
Absolutely, it's a phenomenal book. It's an experience.
I'm a pure, Okay, so this looks interesting. It's really. Oh wait, you're holding him to the wrong webcam.
That's the real webcam.
For the viewer at home, and then I'll show it to you guys. Hang on. I don't know if it's really dark.
I think I remember that one. Yeah.
What are those lights in the background?
It's supposed to be like lights of like a sewer type thing.
Oh, okay.
It's supposed to be like the Seeker in like the vault in that Aside story with Deverell.
Oh, okay.
I'll hold that up.
But that's the big one as well, so it's less thick.
But this one looks tiny for some reason because of the scale. Yeah.
Yeah.
For comparison,
Oh,
Danielle, can you
interesting.
hold up the actual cover? I don't know how we're gonna edit this, but yeah. So you can see like it's the same illustration
It's
of the
edited
Seeker,
differently.
but yeah. But so just like again, like we went through so many processes of getting to that version of it.
Well, because I remember you sent me that one, the cover art for that, and I was like, you can't really see anything.
That's the
It's kind of just black.
Yeah, well, kind of. Also, the
You're like,
printing,
that's the point. I'm like,
that's
Is
the
that
you
a
sent me one
printing
the
thing?
one with the circle. I'm like, yeah, this one's better. You should do this
yeah.
one.
The
Hey.
point is,
Well,
you
it's
can't
also
see
glossy.
dick. Sorry, Danielle.
Well, I was gonna say the one you just showed us is kind of glossy, where this one, like, it's the texture is just different. I don't know what you would call this.
That's
Like
it's
soft.
like a matte. Yeah.
A matte. Okay.
Yeah. Well, that was the other thing is the printers kept printing it incorrectly, so this was supposed to be matte as well. Because the whole point of the matte is so that you can see the illustrations, but because
you
they
don't just get reflections.
yeah they kept printing it glossy, and I was like, what the fuck, guys? And they were like, oh, we don't do matte covers in that size. And I was like, well, why is it an option then?
Right.
But the size that the book ended up being was a size that I much prefer anyway, because this is quite.
Make the next book as
This is like going to be
as big as
riveting audio content, by the way.
You're gonna make the next
Yeah.
book as big as that poster. It'll be like 5 pages.
I don't know if I can.
Oh wow, that is a difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is quite significant.
So it's, I'll just show it to the camera, but it's quite, yeah. It's like one of them looks like a novel, the other one just kind of looks like a magazine. I don't know what this thing just like doesn't. It doesn't feel. This has a weight as well. It's just yeah. This is so much better in every.
I think I made it. I
conceivable
think
way.
It makes a difference.
Yeah.
I think I've said in one of your ads, it's just like new size. You can kill a man with this book.
Yeah. Well, because I insisted on the really expensive paper, because it gives it that weight and texture. And Cameron was like, "You're really hurting our profit margin." And I was like, "It must feel good, Cam. It must feel good." But yeah, so like, I don't want to get too much into like the labor like negotiations and contracts and the marketing and all that stuff. But the upshot is that we basically were able to sell the book through an imprint, maintain the copyright, but use a publication house to get it out there, and maintain most of the profits ourselves, which was like pretty exciting. Now the book has been out for nearly a year and a half, and people seem to really like it, which is something that I didn't look. It's one of those things where you publish it and you expect it to be like you think it's good, but it's hard until other people read it where you're like, is this anything? Like academically, I know like theory wise, it should be good. Like it's paced with this thing and that. But then when people pick it up and they read it and they get it, that's like a whole different thing. And that's the thing that's been the most surprising, I think, for me in this whole process is reading like reviews on Goodreads and stuff like that, where just random people that don't know me or don't know our content read it and like it. And I'm like, it's just so foreign and so weird. Especially because it's something I'm proud of. I think with a lot of the praise that we'd gotten previously, particularly through the podcasts or through the videos and stuff, while it felt like praise, it was like, oh, well, they just like the show. They don't like the like, I don't know. It's different. It's different when it's a thing that has nothing to do with me, I guess.
It was, I think, like with like the podcast, most of the praise was sort of just like, you guys are doing a really good job, and it's like, I appreciate it, but like it's almost like someone like going up to a toddler. It's just like, wow, you're being so helpful when they're standing there like holding a bucket of nails while everyone else is building the house.
Yeah,
It's like, you're doing such a good job. Like that's almost what it felt like.
Kinda,
for the
yeah.
Podcast.
It's a really good thought. Yeah,
Because like most of the feedback you get, people see you're a small channel, and people see that you're just pumping out these podcasts, and people are like, oh, I'm gonna be encouraging to this person. Whereas like with a book, people are just scathing. It's like, if the book is bad, people will tell you.
yeah. But the fun. My favorite thing is when people give it, they'll write like a 3-star review, and it'll be the nicest. They'll be like, "This, I fucking love this book. It's amazing. This is so good." And I'm like, "Why'd you give it 3 stars then?" Happens a lot. I'm like, "Could you not? If you think it's 5, give it 5. Like what?
3 out of 5's above average.
Yeah. No, you're right, absolutely right though, Ben. And I think the other thing is like, if you ask those people the follow-up question of why do you think we're doing a good job, they maybe wouldn't have a compelling answer.
Yeah, it's just kind of like,
Whereas like when
you're just
people
doing a
write
great
book
job.
reviews, like they tend to write like meaningful shit. So that's been a really weird experience for me. And it's part of why I wanted to go through like the journey of how this thing got created, because the whole point of the show is us like delving pretty deep into like a lot of media and things that we want to break apart and understand better. And it behooves me to not do that with my own stuff and go back and reflect on some of this. I think when I was putting the script together, I originally had something in there when I was talking about that transition from when things were really bad to when things got better slowly. And I had something in there about like, this is like how I got there, but it kind of felt like a lie because I don't know why. I don't know how I went from that place to where things were slightly better. It just happened. And like, I didn't want to create this narrative of like, and then I did this, and that, and I was suddenly happier again. Like it, do you know what, like, I think I was just less miserable. I don't know that I ever got happy. I don't know if that's something that I'm ever going to like approach, but in the act of going through and reflecting on that person I used to be, the one thing I can definitely say for sure is that the reason this book exists is the same reason that I still make content, even though I don't necessarily... I'm proud of Art for Artists, and we did like something really cool for a really, really long time, and it got to the point at the end where it was a really compelling show. But I think it was getting to the point where we were no longer... I think we were getting more out of it than the people we were making it for. And that, like, as an entertainer, like, that's not necessarily good.
Because it started when we were both pretty different people, and we kept doing it through that really rough point that we both sort of had. And we came out the other end, and we was, like, still doing it, and it was always, like, sort of a funny talking point of just, like, you know, back in the dark ages, which was, like, 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But it felt like this progression. And I guess now it's kind of like, well, you know, we got through that rough, you know, we went through that trough and we came out the other side.
Yep.
And we actually kind of did something pretty, I guess, pretty significant with the whole thing.
Yeah.
And you kind of just be like, I'm okay with dropping it now because we did it for so goddamn long.
Yeah, it's done. Like, it feels
finished.
finished.
It's like, it's finished, yeah.
And...
When did you start it again?
2013, 2011?
No,
Okay,
it was definitely 2011?
No, 2013, sorry. Yeah.
2013, yeah.
Yeah. Which feels like a lifetime ago.
Yep. Well, it kind of was.
But, I mean, yeah, I think it's interesting because it was I don't want to, like, it, in some ways it probably kept me alive, the show, like, quite literally, like, it was something that I had to turn up to each week. Which is like a scary thought I've had before, where like I know in that period of my life, like it probably literally kept me alive, like having that thing to do every week.
Yeah, it was definitely like those Thursdays was just like, you know, we go do the things on Thursdays.
Yeah.
And it was always there. And
yeah,
in like now having that it's always there is like just way too much.
Well, we don't need it because we're
like,
adults who have like other things, like other
exactly
mechanisms.
But like back then, when it's like you don't really have much going on apart from just like go to university, go to work.
Yeah.
It's like having that always there is just like, oh, it's actually, you can kind of look forward to it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's sort of, I guess, if there was any thought I have off the back of transitioning from what we were doing to what we're going to be doing in the future, like my thought is like how incredibly grateful I am to have been able to do that for as long as we did. But also like I was the one that we kept doing it. So that's like, I'm grateful, but also like we made that happen, and that's an achievement in and of itself. And yeah, it's a really complicated thing to think back and look at. What we're going to be doing next episode is talking through the first book. So we'll break it down into kind of story chunks. I'm going to get you guys to get your insights into it. I'll talk a bit about the process of creating it. Aaron will talk a bit about the editing process. And hopefully it'll be a bit of a recap and a refresher before book 2. And then part 3 will be the same thing, but for book 2 when that drops. We'll try and maybe publish that 2 or 3 weeks after the book comes out, so everyone has time to read it, which would be pretty exciting. Did you guys have any closing thoughts before we wrap up this one?
Oh, it's been a wild ride. I think every time we do these kind of retrospectives, it's always just like, this shit is crazy. It's such a weird, just like slice, and it kind of creates like a history that, you know, like you get older and it's always going to be there because it's on the internet, and it's going to be weird being an adult with this 5, 6, 7 year running podcast when you were basically a teenager. Like that's going to be a weird thing to have. I don't think many people, well, I mean, like everyone's done a podcast, but I don't think it's like, not everyone has kind of done it for that long.
Yeah, and also our show wasn't really about us, so there's this aspect of like
No.
it's us talking about stuff, but it's funny even looking back at it now. Like I look back at shows from last year, and I think about like where I was living and the relationship I was in and all that sort of thing, and even looking back at that while we're talking about like fucking, I don't know, some movie or something, and I'm like, what was I going through at that point in time? Like what was happening behind the scenes? So weird. It's so weird to be able to do that.
It's a strange thing, especially as you get older, reflecting on those moments of your life. Like for me, it feels almost surreal when I look back at just any time, like as a teenager in college. So I think this is kind of cool to see where you were and how to see where you are now.
Yeah.
And it's a fun exercise, somewhat miserable at times, but you know.
Yeah.
But it's cool.
I like to think that it's cathartic, but we'll see how the rest of my
Yeah.
day goes as to whether or not that's true. It could just end up being depressing. I don't know. Yeah, it's really weird. Yeah, I feel very grateful that we have the opportunity to look back at it. But yeah, there are some things that I'm not very proud of. But I suppose that's the work of growing up, I guess. It's what we talked a lot about last time, about Druckmann and things like he's grown and changed. To what extent and to how much he needs to is arguable, but at least he's doing the work. And I think that's the one thing that we definitely did. So I'm really excited to. I think next part's gonna be really fun. Because I haven't really I've talked to both of you about the book, but we haven't really talked about it.
Yeah.
Which I'm very excited to do. So keep an eye out for that. Danielle, do you have any pluggables?
Yeah, I guess visit levelstory.net for a magazine about a story in video games. I just have a new issue out about The Last of Us, so be
good.
sure to check that out. David's in
I'm in
it.
it.
He wrote a piece.
I wrote a very
and it's very
polarizing
good.
article, as I always do.
True, but it was a good polarizing
There
article.
you go. So if you want to fight me about The Last of Us, you can go and do that.
It actually had content. Like, let me just say just one moment that a lot of people, your article is defending a character who people just kind of jump on and don't really give good credible reasons, but your article was actually it's similar to those arguments, but it's different. I don't want to say anything else, but it's good.
There you go. Go check that out. It was one of it's our biggest issue so far, right?
Yeah, it's 72 pages,
Yeah.
so it's a hefty one.
It's a
I
big
was
one,
surprised.
yeah.
I thought it would be 50 pages.
Yeah.
I can't believe. Yeah.
Everyone did amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Shout out to everyone that worked on it. Definitely go check it out.
Yeah.
Cool. I don't think there's anything else I wanted to plug aside from obviously the book itself, but I'm sure there'll be a mid-roll ad in there somewhere. We're sort of in between projects at the moment, but if you want to follow the articles we're writing, ZeroIndent.com is what's housing a lot of the stuff that we'll be making in the future. If you like this podcast, do the things you do with podcasts wherever you find it. Give it a rating. Tell someone about it. You guys know the drill. Tell one person who you think would enjoy it. Tell one person who you think would enjoy this. Send it to them. Bully them into listening to it. That's the best way to get the word out. Otherwise, yeah, thanks for coming on this journey with me, you two. Sorry it couldn't have been more pleasant.
Can only get better from here.
It can only get better from here.
It calls for the doing of great deeds. As with all things worth doing, we are but a sum of our actions. This blinking light in front of me means my time is up. I remain here, reaching to you across the vastness of oceans, awaiting on our next meeting. Good night, Frank.